music that lots of the music she had me learn, there was a fabulous variety. Like I mentioned a while ago, the Khachaturian concerto. She bought me the music, and I mean it's pretty. I mean but 40, 35 years ago, I mean it hadn't been performed that often, and it was contemporary. And I remember that so I cannot say for sure if she in fact encouraged or felt. I mean, I can remember her saying, well, how come he got this commission when I was there too? I mean, so it's, you work so hard and you're good. And it's the acceptance. So I think that Dr. Eckhart, in fact, said, Sonia, this is not how you make enemies, not friends. Start inviting people. Go to concerts where other people's works are being, I think that he...
right. Do you think if she had been a little more, I guess, diplomatic, strategic, might be another word, in terms of promoting herself, in those, in that light, as opposed to, I know I'm good and have something to say, when is everyone else going to catch on, that she might have seen more success during her lifetime in terms of her music.
Perhaps nobody. You don't know. I think that if she would have started brown nosing a little bit and stuff like that, her compositions wouldn't be nearly as effective, because she was very fiery and I mean, I don't want to say out of control, but the ideas would just pop into her head, And I think I don't think I mean, when I'm thinking about other composers that I know,
there's
Canadian composers, and her music wasn't really contemporary. It was, I mean, what she wrote much of it came back to her incredible expertise on her own virtuosity on both of the instruments, and her ideas, the notes, would jump out. I mean, if you looked at the score would, I mean, it just would be magnificent. It was like an artwork, and I don't think often. Forgive me, Mrs. Eckhart, but I don't think she really thought enough about orchestration. Some of the solo stuff that I've played or I've heard played, the orchestra was really, it looked so right on paper, and maybe if it was recorded rather than performed live, it would have had more of an impact. But her music, it really wasn't, it was an extension of the traditions that she was familiar with, in my opinion. I mean, she used a lot of Spanish, almost folk idioms. I mean, just like Bartok. I mean, that same kind of where the rhythms are intense, the melodic things are, I mean, you can pinpoint them. You know that that's not, you know that that's Japanese, or that's Spanish, or that's, that kind of thing. Several of her pieces, it's interesting, and maybe if I was an academic, I would do some research into it, but several of her caprices, and I'd love to see when they were, I mean, I should do this, I should have thought of this today before I came here, but one of her caprices is, like, it's the most fabulous preparation for the Ravel Sagan, the opening of it, and I wonder, I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know if they were both on the same wavelength at the same time, or she heard the piece and sort of, I mean, I have no idea, but the chanson poem, there's several things of chanson that he wrote for Van that are, but that's a French tradition, and she was, in France, and to make these comparisons and contrasts, I mean, maybe that's what I'll do when I retire. But it's really interesting, because it's not, because, what she heard in Winnipeg when she came were, while maybe somebody played something of Strauss, and that was really quite contemporary. So it's it's hard. The frame of reference is hard, but her music was it wasn't so different, and it was very, very traditional. It was it wasn't like it wasn't new. I mean, like 12 tones. She incorporated everything she knew. It was a menagerie. It was like her life was. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. So I suppose it was different in that sense. It wasn't, yes, that's exactly like what. But there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and that's what was different about it. But not as far as the styles, the harmonic structure. It wasn't. It was, I dare say, a bit old-fashioned as opposed to progressively going out into left field somewhere.
What do you think of the statement that would categorize her music as largely coming out of the 19th century, coming out of a romantic, the virtuosic prodigy type of tradition, but being written in the 20th century?
That's a reasonable analogy to I think so.
Yeah. Do you think that had she been less romantic in her inclinations, her composing inclinations, that at this point in the 20th century, even posthumously, she might actually see even more success than she has.
Absolutely.
Because in some ways, I know just for me as working as the music advisor here, it's a little bit it's challenging to promote her as a composer because for new music festivals and that type of thing, her music is not it's not right. New as you say. I mean, it's not on the cutting edge of
but I mean,
and on the other hand, it's different. There's enough harmonic language that isn't straight ahead 19th century that 19th century ears like perceive it as this is different and not what my ear is used to hearing.
I think it's a lot is human nature, in as much as, I mean, Mrs. Eckhart spoke of Canada as the hinterland, sort of. I mean, it wasn't her idea to come here, and I think that she's going to have a recognition, but it's not going to be. I mean, she wasn't the only. I can think of a couple composers. I think the Canadians right now, because we're looking for an identity of our own culturally, and I think that well, I'm thinking about 10 things. Like, it's all right for Madeleine Albright to be Secretary of State. She was not born in the United States, but she could never be president because you have to be born in the United States to be president. Henry Kissinger was, Nixon's whatever he was, right? But he could have never run for president because he wasn't born in the United States. And if you can, go along with me on that, to in fact promote people who were born in Canada and who might have gone to study with X, Y, and Z and chosen to come back to Canada. I feel, even though Mrs. Eckhart meant so much, I feel very strongly about that, to promote this. And especially today, when what basically I have is a Western culture, and there are so many Asians and people from India. That culture is unbelievable. I mean, all of these incredible instruments. So that I'm not even having a Canadian. I'm just trying to promote a Western culture, European culture in Canada. So I'm not sure that if she would have been, a little more, she could work a room better and stuff, if she would have had the success. Because I think there were too many stumbling blocks. But I think this competition that is in her name, the people who have won that competition have, many of them have really owe the reason for their being, you know, sort of famous, if you want to, is because they won that competition. And I think her name and her music will be played because of that. Because the people who are promoting her now are, most of them never knew her. She was dead before they, and so she's being looked at in new eyes, and it's not, I think, you know, my mother used to say it takes three generations to make a gentleman, you know, and I think it will, and it's the third generation now. I think that she will have some success, you know, as a Canadian, and as I mean, there are people who are, oh God forbid, but I mean, like Oscar Morowitz has composed some wonderful things, and he's European, and he came to Canada. He's Canadian, you know, and it's sort of like her. In fact, I think they you know, knew each other and stuff like that. Also, being in Winnipeg, I'm going to just get, you know, fast and dirty, but I mean, French Canadian composers, there are some fabulous ones. The tradition is incredible. I mean, fabulous. Ontario, I mean, you've got your John Weinswags. I mean, that sort of maybe a generation of Harry Summers, the clarinet player who composes, Friedman, Harry Friedman, who's married to Mary Morrison, who's a big, you know, contemporary music. Well, of course she's going to push Harry and that circle in Toronto and the French Canadian, you know, so that's another, it's just the size of this country, and in fact, when you think of composers from the West, if you think of composers, Canadian composers in Canada, like any generation, alive or dead, right? The women I think of right now, I think of, well, there's one who's dead, Michelin Saint-Marcoux. She was fabulous, but she died of cancer when she was very young, French-Canadian. Elizabeth Rahm, who's came to the eastern, to, I think it was Nova Scotia. I went to school with her sister. She's lived, and she's involved in Saskatoon and Regina with the women's music. I mean, she's part of the community as well, but she's a composer. She's in the West. Violet Archer, Jean Coulthard, I mean, Jean is just the classiest lady. Barbara Fenton, they all lived in Edmonton or settled or Vancouver. Alexandria Louis is from Vancouver. She's in so, you know, and Mrs. Eckhart in Manitoba. So, I mean, you know, if you have time on your hands, you could probably really come up with a lot of, I mean, maybe in fact, Mrs. Eckhart's presence in this province did something that for contemporary music and for, you know, women getting out and that we can't tell it because it you know,
the legacy isn't
you
in
don't
full blossom.
exactly you don't know, but as I'm gabbing here and I'm, you know, my thoughts are sort of becoming clearer because I really didn't know what we would, you know, really talk about today, but and the questions, you know, I don't think it would have mattered. She would have been, she had to have Ferdinand trying to cover up all her verbal blurbs, mistakes that she made, and just she had an opinion, and I mean, it's too bad it was dead on most of the times, you know, and so I don't think that would have right, and I think there are, as far as violinists go and pianists go, I don't know any composers who were as brilliant as performing artist as she was. So that's another thing that, and I mean, I brought those kids over here the other day. I mean, they listened to her play. I mean, they like heard her play, and they're just, wow. And so it's for them when they give this concert. I mean, they're, well, what am I going to wear? Do you think we could come here and I could get some of the vibes from, I mean, so that's a lot. None of those kids will necessarily make a career, but I guarantee you, if they play violin, they're going to, Gwen Hobart has done a wonderful here I mean, so it's hard to tell, but I think the competition and having it skip a generation and have a legacy rather than a real live person there to deal with, I think she's going to be recognized. Yeah.
Did it ever surprise you that that they remained in Winnipeg the entire time that they lived in Canada? Did it, given the fact that, that she especially, was quite disappointed with things.
Well,
at least up until a certain point. Did it ever surprise you that they hadn't just, decided to either move back to Europe or move to a bigger Canadian center, or?
No, I think it would have been. I think the idea is that Ferdinand had to have a job because he was so damn devoted to her. I mean, she didn't have to have the idea was she would compose, but you make about minus $500 an hour compose. So, and I think that he was much more user friendly than she was, and he was more I think for the most part, I think this was an incredible challenge for him, and I think that he really succeeded. He could bring things artistically to this community. So I'm not surprised at all. They had a really close, I have no idea, towards the end of his life or the end of it, what their circle, but I know that they had an incredible circle of friends here. Many of them European emigres themselves, and friends of, and I think that I'm not surprised at all that they didn't move back to Europe. They lived through wars. I'm not a bit surprised. And I think that it was even more suppressing for women in Europe. And other Canadians, I think they had, maybe I'm just making this all up, but he was one of the most important people in the city. I mean, I don't remember the art gallery, but boy, we certainly knew about it when he came to town.
He made the art gallery into an institution,
yeah.
I think.
I think
it's fair to say that.
Yeah, and they did travel. They had a chance to travel, but this was their cocoon, And anyways, Mrs. Eckhardt would always complain. She'd always complain because she always wanted things to be better. That part of it too. I mean, here we are talking about some, wonderful spirit, but I mean, she was pretty down to earth. She had standards, and she just, like I try to be actually, she was not going to lower those standards, no matter where. She was going to try and bring people up to her, and without being ugly about it. She just, and so I'm not surprised at all.
Now, I mean, some of what we've just been talking about has actually sort of alluded to this, but, now that how many years have gone by since she passed away? I guess 30.
70. Did she die in 74?
Yeah, 74.
So 25.
About 25 years.
She's much better known now than she was 25 years ago.
Really?
Way, yes.
Yeah. What, and this is probably putting you on the spot a little bit, but where does her significance lie in the Canadian composer landscape? Would you say now that 25 years has gone by?
These questions are so difficult. This question is so difficult for me because I wasn't a composition teacher of hers.
Right.
It's really
right. Okay. Yeah.
Say the question again. Maybe I'll get a.
Well, you're right in
sense.
that you were a student of hers
And I was anxious to
in
play
the
her work.
Performance realm.
Yeah, I was.
And not in the composition realm. And I'm asking you about her significance,
say
not
it
as
again.
a teacher. So, if you can try and give me your view as to where she lies well, how important is she to in the Canadian landscape of?
Do you mean as a composer?
As a composer, or even as a musical figure, maybe.
Well, as a composer, I don't think that I mean, you're not paying me to push her, and you're not paying me to be negative. I don't know. I mean, I don't think as a composer she's probably quite a bit left of center as far as recognition and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the time she decided that she really wanted to be Canadian, she had turned so many people against her because she was,
Mm-hmm.
saying, well, Europe, in Europe and all this. So, but as somebody who's going to be performed as a composer, she's way more user-friendly than 90% of Canadian composers. So she, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
She has written specific. I mean, and orchestras aren't. I mean, orchestras they're going to die. So whether the Montreal Symphony plays one of her pieces means absolutely nothing. But she wrote a lot of chamber music and she wrote a lot of solo things. And I have to say, quite frankly, I try living in the West. When most competitions you play in, including a Canada Council Grant, or any the contests in Canada, you have to play a Canadian work, right? And for years I'm living in Vancouver, and I really want Quebec to be part of Canada. So I read through thousands of French Canadian works, and I tried to get my students to learn something, who lived in Vancouver, to learn something French Canadian. I mean, for a competition. It's not saying that I didn't teach some of Mrs. Eckhardt's things. And then I made, it's who you make friends with, sort of. Then I made really good friends with Harriet Daskin. And then Andy Dawes moved to Vancouver. And so and one of my students, Mark Koenig, had studied with Maria Daskin in Saskatoon years ago, and some of my students went that they didn't know enough to make Mrs. Eckhardt's pieces sound great, but Murray had written 5 or 6 really wonderful, very accessible sonatas where I could get the kids interested in contemporary music, mm-hmm. at which point then it would open a door for me, mm-hmm. to teach more complicated things. But I think that she will be now, I mean, just now, in 3 or 4 competitions that my students are playing, and they need a Canadian competition. Well, it's their 100th anniversary. I don't care. It's a Canadian it's a Canadian composer, and the music was written in the 20th century, even though she wrote it in Mallorca or Berlin. I mean, I'm just sort of saying she was Canadian. Come on, so a lot of her, well, not a lot, but her caprices this year are being played extensively, and they're great. They are accessible now, and I think those will become part of a standard Canadian repertoire for violinists. I
mm-hmm.
believe that,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's as much as I can
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Say.
Yeah. No, that's.
I mean, I don't know.
Very, very interesting. Yeah.
I tell you, if this house were, if somebody could keep this place open, if people could come in it like I did the other day, if there could be a watchkeeper, mm-hmm. somebody, because to get the feeling of this, I mean, all these, Japanese tour buses that come around, this should be a designated area. Mm-hmm. It's just mm-hmm. too bad that.
Yeah, I mean,
to have 2 pieces in this art gallery and 2 pieces. I mean, it's a total waste. Mm-hmm. Well, I shouldn't say that.
No, I mean
really
certainly there's many people that feel that way. Unfortunately, it's part of part of making that happen, or a lot of it is money. And in order for the governments to be funding it, they have to.
Well, Arthur Erickson, went bankrupt. This very famous Canadian architect who, did the Canadian embassy in Washington. He's gone, and he had to forfeit this old house he lived. I mean, he sort of remodeled it over the years, and the gardens and stuff. And it came down to the crunch, but in the end, just enough people who admired him, they bought the house. Anyways, that's another whole topic.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions?
One last one, and maybe this errs on the nostalgic side once more, but if there was one sort of image or like sort of a portrait that you see in your mind when you hear her name, or when you're teaching a student some of her music or whatever, what would that be? Or even if it's not a visual portrait so much as a prose portrait, like what would be just some of the traits that just are the essence, I guess, of who she was for you? And
okay, well, as far as feeling passion, she had. It's the passion that got her through her life. The way she looked. I mean, she was dressing like a feminist. I mean, she always wore sort of slack, straight skirt, a tie, this powerful image that she was feminine. The incredible mascara she wore around her eyes that just was. And the smile, how her eyes crinkled up. But she hardly ever looked like that at that picture. That was, sort of, I'm getting close. I mean, she was, like a little, I was so tall, and she'd come up to me, and I mean, just that, passion. And her hands, I remember her hands vividly. Because I spent a lot of time watching things, because I wondered, how the hell does she do that, But I remember the shape of her hands, and they were soft and beautiful, but incredibly facile. I mean, that's, I know that I missed out some, but when you said that, I thought of this. You didn't really open the door, but there was so much energy that she said, the door would open, and there she was.
Sort of sucked you into this,
and that's
other world.
A passion, And I think she was desperate to be accepted, and I'm just thinking, she wasn't accepted really anywhere in her life. She either chose it or circumstances, But I think it was probably my husband could help more. But I don't think that maybe she ever wanted to be accepted in Winnipeg, or as a violinist or a pianist, or as the wife of an artist. I'm not so sure that, I think that perhaps she just didn't want to be accepted, and that the drive to sort of try and be accepted, even though her psyche said no, I think that might have made her the way she is,
That's I mean, I didn't know her at all, obviously, but that's very interesting, because just from things you read and working here and speaking with other people that did know her too, it seems like there must have been some sort of like polemic in a way that was at work, in terms of helping form who she was, because it just wasn't straight up.
No,
I mean,
it was
interesting. Complicated.
Didn't we come up with something good here?
We should publish this.
Right, I tell you, go to it. No, but I really think that's. I think if she would have been accepted, she wouldn't have pushed herself to work. I really feel strongly about that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways.
Thank you very much.
I've got to go.
Interview with Gwen Thompson on the 19th of October, 1998, in the house, which still has everything in it.
Yes.
At 54 Harrow.
Much to my delight.